Hey people, Sleepy Reader here, Damien, with my new comics countdown, my thoughts on the 15, way too many comics that I got last Wednesday. I've read them all. I put them in kind of an order of ones I enjoyed the least to the ones I enjoyed the most. Not making... I'm uneasy with this ranking of things, so I always say I'm not making... a big critical judgment or saying which comic is purely the best, but just how I enjoyed it in the moment in my reading. Because sometimes I'll be aware, okay, this comic is a better comic than this other one, but I enjoyed this other one better anyway this week, so I'm going to put it up higher. The one I did not enjoy at all, I'm afraid, is Thumbs, by a brand new Image comic by Sean Lewis and Hayden Sherman. The art really looked cool at first when I flipped through it, but there's something about the coloring that distanced me a lot. It's like there's a grid of dots over everything, and it just seems to kind of, as you're sitting and reading it, kind of distance you or make the art feel kind of fuzzy and further away. So I did not get into that as well as I should have, because there's a lot of excellent moments in the art. Let me see if I can find some other nice pages. So Hayden Sherman is clearly a good artist, but he did his own coloring, and I just don't like his judgment in coloring. Although it also was cool that it was mostly shades of gray and then some red. But the biggest problem was the story, and I guess the fault could still be the artist and the writer. The story, I understood there was some kind of rebellion, and it involved technology, and it involved young people. And apparently these young people were poor. But other than that, I couldn't connect all the threads. So I read this big, long issue, this first issue that might have been like 40 pages or more, and I still don't really understand what's going on. And I found it frustrating. I put down the book several times. I knew I wanted to list. By then, I knew it was probably going to be my least favorite book of the week, and I wanted to read it all the way through to be fair to it, but I kind of think if I hadn't paid for it, I wouldn't have read it all the way through, and I definitely won't get the next issue. So that was number 15. In at number 14 is Young Justice. Basically, I was just really annoyed by the dialogue of the characters that seemed too cutesy. And then this was the final issue of the first arc, and in terms of wrapping up the plot and revealing the plot points and wrapping them up, it was all just kind of just so. This happened because we say so, and what we say in the dialogue, and it doesn't grow out of story or anything. And you can feel the writer through the dialogue trying to make you think it's all clever, the way it's all interconnected, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels just sort of forced. I got all 6 issues of this because I was real excited about Gemworld. I was also excited by Patrick Gleason, the artist that was on it at first. Now it's a different artist, but the art was actually very good. John Timms. But I was all excited about Amethyst and Gemworld, and neither of those were done with much charm or fun. Yeah. Oh, there's let me show you some of the art that was good, because I really liked this page here. And so a lot of creativity and imagination in the art. And even Lord Opal is kind of cool, although he was very cool in the original 70s comic too, in a different way. Black Hammer 45, the final issue of this miniseries. Cool cover. The art is weak here, and I've complained about that all along. And the ending was kind of flat. Yes, it was a big fight scene, but that's kind of all it was. Oh, big fight scene and sacrifices are made. And so along with the fact that there was nothing additive about this final issue into what we already knew and felt about the Black Hammer team, the art didn't deliver much in the way of convincingness in a lot of big action scenes, explosions, fist fights, knife fights, shooting. But the art, if you're depending on the art in a comic book to make the climax exciting, you didn't get that here. Ignited is the flagship book of a new... So that Black Hammer's number 13, number 12 for me is Ignited, the flagship of a new superhero universe coming from Humanoids. But they've hired Mark Waid and a bunch of other people to be kind of their American think tank to help them create this world. And this issue of Ignited is written by Mark Waid and someone named Kwanzaa Osajyefo. And my problem with it was particularly my expectations. I was looking, oh, what's this cool new superhero universe going to be about? Well, I can't really tell from this first issue, except that it's going to be really depressing and real world centered, so that I'm not going to buy into superheroes solving problems here. This is about the devastation of a high school that's had a school shooting at it the year before, and now school's starting up again, and everyone has to somehow come to grips with what happened. And different people have different reactions. There's a parent militia forming. Some people want to arm the teachers, etc., etc. A lot of the students who are sick of the idea of guns and bullets are very upset about parents and teachers who want to be armed. And into that, we're going to bring superheroes. So when we don't get much of a sense of how we're going to bring that in, except the superheroes are going to be these teenagers who are going to get revenge on evil talk radio hosts. I don't know. Too much real world stuff in a sense. So someone else might find this a brilliant comic, but to me it just wasn't what I was expecting, I guess. And if I want I don't want my depressing stuff mixed in with my superheroes to the level that this seems aiming towards. Beasts of Burden, another one that suffered from my expectations. This was just a 2-issue mini-series. I suspect that issue 1 was done a long time ago, and issue 2 was done just recently. So I really liked issue 1. It seemed like a really cool horror comic. The art was by Jill Thompson. Now in issue 2, the art is by Benjamin Dewey, who's a really good artist. But the story just kind of went flat. I didn't feel involved in the horror of it all. I could see all the cool horror stuff going on, but somehow it didn't suck me in the way the first issue did. There's always, in the Beasts of Burden's books I've read, a certain distancing and I don't know why it feels so distanced, but in the writing, so that there's not one character to get my emotional hooks or anything. It's just a wide assortment of animal and, in this case, human characters too, all of whom have some interesting bits of dialogue, and there's interesting bits of plot stuff happening, but not... I think you'd feel the horror more if you were closer to one person's experience, maybe. I'm not sure why I ranked Guardians of the Galaxy Annual quite so high, because I'd say only one of the stories in here did I totally understand or totally feel like it totally delivered. There are 3 sort of short stories, and it also seems to tie into something about the Black Order that I didn't know about. One of the stories is about Warlock, but I didn't even realize it was Warlock until very late in the story. He looked close enough to what Quasar looked like in the previous story, and there's this fade out on Quasar, and then this fade in the next story, and I thought it was still Quasar, but eventually it's Warlock. And maybe I should have noticed that the front of his costume was different, but he was a similar looking blonde guy. The artist changed between two, so that didn't help. But then, Warlock saves a planet of primitive people, but does he really save them or not? It's very hard to discern what the writer's intentions were here. This was the first comic I've ever read by Teenie Howard. She wrote the Warlock story. And it just felt like something was missing. And then there was a story about Darkhawk, a character I know nothing about, and I was a bit confused about what's going on there. But there was cool stuff in all of these stories, and I guess it was enough to keep me lightly amused. And some of these others I had higher expectations for, did not have that high expectations here. I guess it's eventually going to hook up with Guardians of the Galaxy in a few more issues, the regular ongoing. So it's just kind of an odd annual. Maybe a lot of fun for people who are really up on all of the doings in the cosmic side of the Marvel universe. Expectations again. Red Sonja, this was not a bad issue, but the previous issues created higher expectations. And now it seems like Red Sonja's situation is completely hopeless, but I felt in previous issues she'd been regularly outsmarting this evil emperor who wants to conquer her country, Harkania, I think, or I can't remember the names of all the countries that. I think it's Zamora conquering Harkania. But yeah, all of a sudden it's a book about a totally hopeless war, a tiny country totally outnumbered and having no chance. Before it was a bit of the clever smaller country that's going to beat the big country, but suddenly they just seem desperate. And this issue is maybe kind of depressing and all about how to survive the war with a country like this. You have to give up everything that you believe in, or something like that. Desert all your friends and become something different than you were to survive the war. So kind of yuck. So that was Red Sonja was number 9. The Guardians annual was number 10. In at number 8 was this Hulk one-shot by Peter David. And it reads like it was an old script lying around in inventory, I think. It's a good sort of fill-in Hulk story, an evergreen Hulk story that could be told at any time. Where the Hulk, or Bruce Banner, kind of reviews different parts of his life. And so Peter David is a master at good old-fashioned comics, and so he does a good job of it. You might have seen this in a Hulk annual at any time. This, I guess, is just a one-shot, but not officially an annual. Maybe because Immortal Hulk selling so well, they just pulled out any old other Hulk scripts they had lying around in inventory. I mean, that's just my big guess on this. Dale Keown's art I hardly recognize anymore. Has he been doing comic books much lately? It just seems a different style than I remember him doing. But it doesn't seem at all like a very modern style either. So maybe this artwork was in inventory too for a while. Don't know. But so I mildly enjoyed it. I think if things like Red Sonja and Beast of Burden had lived up to my expectations of them, I wouldn't have enjoyed my enjoyment of this would have been relatively lower than those. But so it goes. Shazam also, maybe I've really been enjoying this a lot, and it's usually been towards the top. It's coming in at number 7 for me, which I guess is respectable. But everything up to number 5 here is really all a little bit less exciting than I would have hoped. And here it feels, there's all these plot threads that have been going on, and it just felt jarring, the turns that things took. Suddenly it was less. They were a less appealing. The plot was taking a less appealing route for me, including Billy Batson meeting his father, and his father telling his story about he and his mom. It's still not clear what happened to the mom. The father went to prison. So how did Billy end up in the foster care system? I don't know what happened to the mom. But anyway, it just didn't quite work for me, the whole Billy Batson and his father. The stuff that's happening in these magic lands was just didn't hook me as much as previous issues of Shazam. So this could be kind of an in-between issue to more exciting stuff happening. I hope it's not a sign of Jeff Johns running out of gas in some way, or I don't know. In at number 6 was Green Lantern. And I think a lot of what I enjoyed about this was as you can see from the cover, the very purposeful throwback, callback to the Neal Adams, Denny O'Neil, Green Lantern, Green Arrow books from the late 1960s, I think, possibly the early 70s. And there's even moments where you can see Liam Sharp doing his best to be more like Neal Adams than he normally would be. But I actually liked his artwork when it was more Neal Sharpish. Not Neal Sharp. What's Sharp's first name? I should know. I probably just said it and I've already forgotten it. Liam Sharp. When it was more like Liam Sharp than Neal Adams. Let me see if I can find some page where he really went all out for the Neal Adams look. Yeah, like there. I mean, it's a fun call out to Neal Adams. It was a weird, odd story from Morrison, but not a Morrison-like story, really. But it did have a little bit of that flavor of that goofy Silver Age kind of plotting. A lot of it involved the people coming over from the universe of the Xeen Lantern, Xeen. I've never heard of that variation of the Green Lantern, but anyway, it was kind of fun, and I think that Morrison is revving up to do a big multiverse kind of story in here from cover previews I've seen. So this made sense in that context. I was real excited that Birthright was back, and it came in at number 5, and I guess I did enjoy it more than these, but not as much as I usually enjoy Birthright. Maybe it's because there was a 5-month gap since the last issue. Or maybe it's that Birthright's gone on a little too long. But still, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and as usual, there was a few twists. It's a bit frustrating that we're back in the situation of an evil government agency. Before it was the FBI, now it's some kind of secret government agency that deals with magic, capturing our hero and treating him badly. And he's been through such a bad time in his life that you feel really sorry for him. We get some interesting flashbacks to our characters growing up in Theranos, but it's starting to feel a bit too stretched out. So I hope either that this is leading into a whole new storyline with a lot going on in it, or they're leading up to a final climax and ending. I think they've said they're going 50 issues, so that leaves 14 more issues to go. Anyway, not bad. I'm definitely I've bought into Birthright, and I'm going to go all 50 issues. Unless something goes incredibly, horribly wrong. So the next 3, number 4, 3, and 2, all were about equal, and I kept shuffling around trying to decide what order to put them in. But finally I decided to make Criminal number 4. And it is, in fact, issue number 4, right? Where does it say? No, it's issue number 5, sorry. But anyway, Criminal came in at number 4. And I think the reason why is that it was a story of a private eye hunting down a woman, and it was full of very familiar film noir or Raymond Chandler kind of things, and so it just felt a little more familiar and a little less, I don't know, it just a little less compelling to me than the average issue of Criminals or story arc of Criminal that I've read. Also, I became more and more aware of these giant splash pages that just have a whole bunch of writing down the side, and suddenly it doesn't feel like I'm reading a comic book. It feels like I'm reading a book, a page of a book, and then looking at the illustration, and then maybe going back and reading the rest of the page. But I didn't. It kind of, every time they did this, it kind of threw me out of the story a bit. I think they've been doing that before. I mean, it's not like this is the first time they've done it, but it just kind of jumped out at me here. I think they have either 3 or 4 of those splash pages. But still, this was amongst the most enjoyable comics of the week, and I'm looking forward to see where it's going to go next. And next issue is this Private Eye story is going to hook up into one of our more regular criminal situations. So this might be a setup for a story that will grip me more as it goes along. And I have nothing against a good old-fashioned Private Eye story. So, there was no pain there. Again, it was kind of the, just a relative enjoyment. Perhaps surprisingly, Section 0 came ahead of Criminal for me. I just enjoyed it a lot. I really savored it in all its sort of hyped up 1980s artistic glory. I really enjoyed the art. It just seemed like a really good example of what they would have liked to have done in the 80s. And the plot is wild and woolly. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or it doesn't seem like that. It's just events piling up on top of each other, and our characters kind of following one thing after another. But it works, and it's just fun. So I'm really psyched. I think there's 6 issues in this series, and then they will be doing another 6-issue series about Section 0 back in the 1950s, I believe. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm really glad that this comic exists. So that was number 3, and then in at number 2 was Stronghold, and it was really, well, again, with all 3 of these, it was really hard to decide. Let me do this. It was really hard the 3 of them were neck and neck in terms of my enjoyment. Stronghold is a really good comic. The art also feels a bit out of time now. The art styles have changed so much. I would say this art style feels like really good Vertigo art from a while back, perhaps. And you could imagine that this might have been a Vertigo comic book at some point, or some kind of more sophisticated DC for adults comic book in the 80s or 90s. But it's being done now, and it's really good. And the plot has moved along nicely, and there's really creepy stuff in here too. So it's kind of a horror story, science fiction story, superhero story, what have you, and a little bit of a Philip K. Dick quality to it, or a Truman Show quality to it. But by far, the best comic book for me this week, the one I enjoyed the most, well above all the others, my number 1 pick, it was, in a sense, it was twice as good as the 3 before it, was the penultimate issue of Paper Girls. And yeah, it's just really neat. Great art, great writing from Brian K. Vaughan. If only there were more Brian K. Vaughans writing comic books, I guess. People need to figure out the way they've all studied Alan Moore and studied Brian Michael Bendis, I guess, and other people. They should all be studying very closely how Vaughan makes things kind of nonstop compelling. So, and of course, I'm a sucker for a good science fiction story, and I really feel like this is a really fun time travel story with lots of emotion and good characters. The time travel is really complicated. I feel like I'm understanding about 80% of it, and I will eagerly do a reread of the whole series at some point, now that I know more to fit together all the pieces. I hate to say Brian K. Vaughan is a genius, but I kind of felt that way while reading this issue, just because I hate to call anyone a genius. And in some way, Vaughan irritates me, especially in his back matter in Saga. But anyway, that's my 15 issues this week. I actually feel better talking about them. Maybe I've just been feeling a little blue this week for no particular reason. But I look forward in 2 days to getting more new comics. And I've also been chugging all the back issues I can of the Immortal Hulk, and really enjoying it a lot. So I read a whole bunch, or read and reread a whole bunch digitally leading up to this trade, and then got this trade. And in this trade is the 2 issues where he's in hell. And I would say of the whole run, those 2 issues in hell, even though I thought I would love it because I love stories in hell, made the least sense and connected least well. But I'm hoping, as this series, which is really long-form storytelling, even though each issue is pretty packed, as this series progresses, hopefully for a few more years, it'll tie back into this whole idea of hell, and we'll get a lot more, and it will enrich the story eventually. Luckily, in this trade, only 2 of the stories were in hell, and the rest came back to Earth. It's amazing how this, I think, is a really good, this series, if you start with Immortal Hulk #1, which I think you do need to do, although to get the most out of it, but I dived in on issue 17 and was already enjoying it. You could just read this Immortal Hulk series, but it ties in to so much of the Hulk's history. It's amazing that they make all these tie-ins and continue a organic, really good story. So it's in a sense a comic that the old-timers who've read a ton of Hulk can enjoy, and people who've never read Hulk before and say, well, I'm not really a Hulk person, can really enjoy it too. Okay, now, time for me to go. Talk to y'all later.